Welcome to the Canny Conversations Podcast, Conversations with a Cause, with social entrepreneur Safaraz.
Hello and welcome to Canny Conversations with Safaraz. Conversations with a cause that we hope will captivate you cannily. Well, they said it wouldn't last, Seth, but we're back. How are you?
We are back, and we've had fantastic feedback in some aspect of it. Some of it glowing, and some of it actually just challenge you and shake you and makes you think and makes you wonder. But yes, we are back, and we were talking about this earlier on as well, to podcast or not to podcast, but we are podcasting.
We are podcasting indeed, like an old married couple. We're back. Look, the stars have been the people that have been listening to us, haven't they? Yeah. We've had some wonderful feedback, and the great thing is that you learn, and this whole exercise is about starting a conversation and about learning. So incredibly grateful for the comments that we've received. We're going to try and take them on board, and it's wonderful to be back. It's wonderful to be doing a second series, and we hope that people will enjoy it, that they'll like and they'll subscribe and let us know what they think. So in very summary, I suppose, Saf, what we're going to do is our best.
Yes, we're going to do our best, aren't we?
We're going to do our best, and you can only do your best. You can always do better, though, Saf. We've got to try all the time to be the best that we can be. These are all phrases, aren't they, that we hear?
Yes.
So when we're talking about best, give us your take on what does best look like to you? How do you define best?
I think it means different things to different people. I mean, I've had situations where people say, well, we've done our best as a sign of not achieving what they wanted to achieve. And so it's a little bit of an excuse, maybe a little bit of consoling. But is your best enough? That's the question, isn't it? That's one of the questions. Is your best yet to come? Is best good enough? What does that mean? And it means different things to different people. Sometimes it means an element of acceptance. Sometimes it means an element of, we're unhappy with the results, but we have to accept it and take it and so forth. If somebody said to me, I actually had a discussion recently. Somebody said, once we do our best, there's nothing more that you can ask. And that got me thinking, actually, is our best due to our ignorance of what we don't know? Is our best really the best? How do we know that is our best? How do we know that is the limit, that we could have achieved? And there's an element of reflection. There's an element of understanding. Your best could be your best as far as your knowledge is, as far as your limits are. But could there be more? I mean, I think when we talk about doing our best, or when somebody comes to you and says, I've done my best, I think we can accept that because they've probably done their best at the time with the knowledge, with their understanding, and with the right motivation. And we have to take that in a positive light. If it's said with the positive, in a positive way, I think that's the key for me, that it is the best at the time, or it can be the best at the time. But, we're living in a world which is evolving, which is changing, and it's about learning and the journey. And I think the two things, learning and the journey, is absolutely vital, because, we're hoping the fact that their best will improve tomorrow. And, you're going to be on that continuous learning, because there's always room for improvement. And, there's a saying that we used before, is that every day is a school day. So you've learned something, you've been more aware of it, and you're continuously improving. And I think that's where we've got to go back to the point that we're saying, is doing your best a negative thing or is a positive thing? Yeah, it's a positive thing in some aspects, but it can be negative if you're consoling yourself to say, that's it for me, because you've got to have hope. You can't lose hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you what I think. I think there are two ways of measuring best. Numerically, you can measure best in the sense of, if, for example, you're playing a round of golf, then your best score is 72, or if you're playing cricket, your best score is 150. So there can be a numeric measure on best, but that is not the defining. That's not definitive for me, because sometimes, you can, play in a cricket match and you can score 150 on a really easy wicket against not very good bowling. And yet the next game you can score 30 out of a total of 70 on a really nasty wicket against really good bowlers. And that can actually be a better performance, although that isn't reflected numerically. So let me challenge you. Good organisations, high-functioning organisations don't need to set targets because their people will always be motivated and they'll always do their best. And because you can't do more than your best, what's the point in having a numeric target?
I think the first thing is, you've heard this, many people say this, and I've said this many times as well. What you measure, you can't improve. So it's, if you're not measuring something, then there's no way of improving something. You measure it, you can improve it. If you can quantify it, you can look at how you can make a difference. And that's with life, that's with anything else. It's conscious is the first thing. You've got to be conscious. You've got to be aware of where you are, what you're doing. And you've got to be able to translate that to something. Otherwise, it's a very subjective thing in terms of, I've done my best. It's like, getting onto a bike and you think, I'll do this up to a point that I get tired. You might get tired at 20 minutes, but you might think that's good enough. But if you had a target to say, I've got 5 more minutes as my target, then you'll achieve that as a target. Yes, I get the fact that you're best, but how do you quantify that? And how do you get that challenge? How do you get the push in terms of doing more? And a lot of this is about doing more, getting more, and being more.
But part of it, I think, is just being honest with yourself. I mean, best is relative. Best isn't something that's set in stone. I mean, what one day we might go into work or we might set about doing something and we might have worries on our mind or we might not feel very well. And we do an honest job professionally. And we've done our best. The following day, we might feel on top of the world and maybe actually produce more, but not have given our best. I think it's very dangerous to always to try to measure best in terms of numbers, because I think it's much more complicated than that.
But there must be at times where, you feel that you've done your best only to have some new, say, stimulus to force you to do more, to work harder. Discovering your new best or new current best. It's an evolving thing. It's not the best it's the best maybe at that moment in time, but you've got to be able to sort of put something to understand it. There's certain things that, as I said, we know, certain things that we don't know, but it's really pushing you to your limits and constantly striving it. Otherwise, it's an element of acceptance. And it's not about gratitude or not being humble, but it's really, is there any more? Could there be more? And I think that's a continuous journey. You talk about, we've talked about marginal gains before. We talked about David Brailsford, marginal improvements, continuous improvements, innovation, improving. Otherwise, it's an element of mediocrity. It's an element of acceptance of this is it. This is the ceiling. You've got to keep pushing that ceiling in everything that, we're doing. So it's not just a matter of best is enough. Your best is yet to come.
Well, that might be the case in some circumstances, but, if you're an athlete and you're 65, then, the truth is that your best probably is in the past. Best is subjective and an objective thing. If somebody said to us, which of these podcasts do you think is the best one, then essentially we're making a subjective judgment, aren't we?
That might be slightly different, isn't it? That's probably a slightly different example. I mean, what we're talking about as the starting point is, if somebody says, I've done my best and my best is enough, often that is consoling themselves to say, I've done what I can, I can't do any more. And it's different to say, I'm putting my best clothes on, or, I'm having the best food that I can. That is the subjective element of it. That's what you feel is the best. It's where you use the phrase, and often we're using that to really designing ourselves to say, that was fine. We're okay with that. And in reality, often people aren't. They're not okay with it, but it's an element of acceptance. If you were forced to do more, if your life depended on it, would there be anything more? It's like in the month of Ramadan, when we're refraining from eating and drinking for a period of time, in normal times, I would struggle. But because I'm forced to put myself into that position, I can refrain myself for 16 hours, 18 hours. But in normal conditions, I'm sort of hungry at 11 o'clock in the morning. So, and it's that element of really pushing the boundaries, pushing that sort of ceiling, and sometimes giving ourselves an excuse to, it's a get out clause often. It's an excuse, it's a reason, it's consoling. I've said that a few times. It really, you're just patting yourself on the back, consoling yourself, saying, yeah, that's fine. At times, we need that obsessive behavior. We need to be focusing more. We need to be sort of pushing ourselves, not resting on our laurels, not having complacency, but having the courage, keep going, keep pushing, keep driving. And at the same time, maybe be in a position where you look at the environment, the climate that you're in, you talk about SAS and so forth. People are pushed to their boundaries and even pushed even further. If it was left to people's own sort of sense of being left to their own devices, they probably wouldn't have. So it really is that pushing your boundaries, not being comfortable. And I think comfort ourselves by saying, I've done the best that I can. And often there's more to come. And I think that's where best relating to performance, not relating to, as I said, the podcast example they gave or the clothes example and so forth. It's about performance. It's about high-performing environments and creating a high-performance culture.
I just want to sort of slightly explain what I mean by objective and subjective. What is the best car? Well, what the best car is if you're looking about, what's the most comfortable, what's the best looking car, that is a subjective judgment. If it's what is the fastest car or what is the most economical car, then clearly that can be measured, numerically. But in terms of doing your best, I take your point. It can be a cop-out. I've done my best, so that's good enough. Sometimes your best has to be good enough. And one of the lessons that you learn in life, and it's a tough lesson, is sometimes you genuinely do your best and it's not good enough. And when that happens, it's quite important, I think, not to beat yourself up. And there's also this business of sustainability. Nobody can work at full gas all of the time. If you do that, if you run an engine in the red all of the time, it will break. If somebody works all of the time, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, they can't do it forever. So sometimes looking at sort of big picture rather than small picture, sometimes not doing your best on a particular day actually in the long term is good for you. I'm a man of a certain age and I work out and I exercise regularly pretty much every day. But there are some days that I just know that I haven't got it in my legs. And the best thing to do is to either, have an easy workout or perhaps give myself a day off. And that's actually the best in terms of my long-term health and well-being. Do you not agree?
Yeah, some aspects. I mean, it's a continuous thing, isn't it? I mean, I think we are talking about the same thing, but we're talking it from a different perspective. And I'm getting focused on performance. I mean, I can say I've already surpassed my best. I had a target. I've done my best. I've already surpassed it. But how do you reach the next level? How do you reach the new level? And I think a lot of it is about potential. And when people look at potential, often say, well, actually, this person has got much more potential and they're not achieving what their potential is. And it's a perspective and a perception. The individual might be thinking, I'm struggling as I am and I'm giving my all just to get where I am. But it's really, is there any more? And it's really that element of, and often that little bit more is that continuous journey of more. And it's not about putting your foot down at all times. It's about different way of thinking, different way of improving and where the improvements can be. And it's not necessarily about working hard. It is about looking at things from a different perspective. As I say, we often use the word working smarter, but it's really getting that overview of how can the improvements be made. And the word that I tend to sort of look at is what can be done better. And if you can look at what can be done better rather than I've given it all, then you're asking an open question. And if you look at what can be done better on an ongoing basis, then the question really changes. And is this the best that you're aiming for? Could you do more? And it's like, you've had, say we've had Series 1, our aim should be with Series 2 to improve. we're saying, well, actually, we've done the best that we can, and that's it. That's the bar that we've set ourselves. Then we've given up. We've got to set that bar higher. We've got to really push ourselves further and set that bar higher.
Now, I think there's a confusion here, Saf, because I don't think saying I've done my best is necessarily saying I can't do better. You may in a particular set of circumstances have genuinely done your best, but that is not the same as saying that I can't do even better. And also, to what extent do you think best is relative? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. If somebody, says, who's the best English football manager? The best English football manager in the last sort of 15, 20 years, then I suspect somebody might say, Sir Alex Ferguson or Arsene Wenger or Jurgen Klopp. Now, I'm going to throw a name into the pot. I'm going to throw Alan Kirbishley into the pot. That's where he deserves to be, doesn't he, eh? Anybody from South London would probably tell you that. But a lot of people would say, Alan who? Alan Kirbishley was manager of Charlton Athletic for a period of time. Little South London club, not a lot of money, and yet they were permanently in the Premier League. In the context of the resources that were available to him, you could make a very strong case, in my view, to say he was one of the best ever Premier League managers. So best has to be said in some sort of context, doesn't it? It's not universal.
It is, and you've completely baffled me with some of the names because they don't mean much to me. But I'm a very simple guy, and at the end of the day, we look at ourselves first, and we look at am I doing my best in the work that I'm doing, and I think we need to challenge ourselves and look at the course that we're doing. You've got to be able to get feedback. Feedback is absolutely vital. I mean, we started this podcast and saying, well, we've had feedback from different levels of people. If we thought we've done our best, why is the point of getting feedback? You've asked people to look at improving. If we weren't thinking of improving, we're not thinking of doing better. That's it. We've come for the second series, and you know what? We've set the bar at the first series, and that's enough. We're not resting on our laurels here. We want to get more. We want to squeeze more out of it. I want to get more value out of you. I want to give more value to the audience.
Well, yeah, okay. I don't think you've been listening or understanding. I have not been saying that because, yes, in the first series we've done our best. That doesn't mean that we can't do better. Because you do your best, it doesn't mean that you can't do better, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't strive to do better. And you get feedback because that helps you to do better in the future. But it doesn't mean that at that particular time you haven't genuinely and sincerely done your best. So please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying because you've done your best at something that means that you're sort of complacent and saying I can't do better. If I've given you that impression, that's not what I'm saying.
No. But we as I said, earlier on, I said we're talking similar things. We're talking very similar things. There's two contexts to this. One, which is that it's about improvements. It's about continuous improvement. It's really about setting the bar higher. It's about results. It's about outcomes. It's about seeing things and saying, what could I have done better? There's another element of how we perceive people. And, as I said, I could say to you, this is a good film. Best in terms of good film. Best in terms of, this particular manager is a good manager. That's an element of, we regard that in a positive light. But when you're thinking about best, you've got to start thinking about better. You've got to thinking about improvements. You've got to, what does best mean? As I said, it's a very, it's a personal word. It's a very individual word to different people. Best clothes, best food, best restaurant. There's got to be some element of that. That's fine in that context. But on a personal level, in terms of the team, what's the best team? Our work, as an example, or what's the best team at a particular season, football, an example. So you talked about before. That's where the competition comes in. That's where the measurement comes in. That's where the improvements come in. That's where you're setting yourselves further targets, setting the bar higher. You're focused on outcomes. You're focused on improvements. You're focusing on results. The continuous improvements regularly. Those are the sort of things we're talking about. So we are going around the houses a little bit in some aspects of it, but exactly that. It is the word doing your best a cop-out? in most cases, I think people console themselves, they sympathize, you've done your best. And that's an element of really giving a little bit of assurance to that person. At times, it's said after the event. And after the event is really an element of a slight pity, maybe a little bit of assurance, consoling. But when you look at it in terms of doing your best, it's being aware, but also certain things that you're not aware of, and really getting, maybe this is where coaches come in, this is where somebody else comes in and looks at it from a third perspective, overall a bird's eye perspective, or a third eye perspective, and you will see things that you're not seeing. And therefore you think, actually, you know what, I could do more. I can do more. And you open up your yourself to giving more. It's really accepting the fact that there could be more, overcoming, analyzing, being a little bit more data aware, conscious. And there's an element really to being not comfortable. We can't be comfortable to a certain level to say, yeah, that's fine. Otherwise you're just accepting that's your limit.
Well, I don't think that's the case at all. And I also think, if you let's talk for a few minutes about targets in terms of being best. Actually, numeric targets can be a huge barrier, because what happens is if you set somebody a target, then that they may well be able to do better than that. But the target can be a limiting factor. Targets, you can at sales companies and businesses where, you've got a target to sell 80 widgets this week, and you can sell 100, but that if you sell 100 next year, you'll be expected to sell 110. Whereas if you expect to sell 80, then you'd have a 10% increase in your targets for next year. So people who are canny can actually, and this is all about being canny, this series, but, people can actually start to understand that. So numeric targets can be hugely limiting. And what's the other great limiter in terms of performance? Great limiter in terms of performance is demotivation, is people not being confident. Now, if you set yourself a target, a numeric target, then you might achieve it and you might not. But if you set yourself a target to do your best, and you don't cheat yourself, because I accept entirely what you're saying. Yes, you can use it as a cheat. You can say, I've done my best, when you know that you haven't done your best, which isn't the same thing. If somebody says, I am genuinely going to do my best, then they cannot fail. And therefore, if they don't fail, the confidence will increase. And so will the performance. Why do, some of the most charismatic and effective managers in the world, not just in the field of sport, but in other things, tell people to go out there, to express themselves, to enjoy themselves, because they know that if you do that, that is where you will perform best. If you start setting people numeric targets, you in many cases are setting them up for failure. And when you set people up for failure, what you're likely to end up doing is demotivating them. So you're actually degrading the performance rather than...
I seem to have touched on over here, I think. Adrian, there's a lot there that you've said, and I'm just trying to dissect some of it. I think there's quite a lot that we do agree on. You might think that that's not the case, but there's a lot that we agree on. I think we're talking a couple of different things, but there's a few things that we do agree on. Best is different things to different people. There's no doubt. It can be objective, but it's often subjective. For some customers, we talk about from a customer's perspective, it can be best price, it can be best customer service, it can be best range and products and services. I'm not disagreeing with that in any way, shape or form. The best car, the best can be the fastest, the best can be in terms of experience, customer service, all of these. So there's an element of objectiveness, there's an element of, measurable best, there's an element of subjective best as well. And all of these are common day language, how people communicate, and the word best itself. We're not trying to analyze what the word best is and what context people use the best, but it's, when people say, is my best good enough? Is good enough good enough? And it's really sometimes, and we're not talking about perfection here, because we've spoken about perfection before. We'll probably speak about perfection again. People talk about perfectionism and so forth. That's not what we're talking about here in terms of best as in perfection or best in terms of achieving 100%, but it's a continuous journey. It's a continuous journey. And really, it's about being conscious, being aware. I'll give you an example. We had a Google Ads campaign in our business for a government project called Kickstart, and we've got our marketing guy. He went and did a little bit of research, and he says, well, it's a very competitive word at this moment in time, Kickstart, because we've got quite a lot of competition. So the price that we've got to pay for a click is a little bit more than what we normally pay. But it's a very competitive word, and we'll do the best that we can. And because he's a marketing person, he's looking at it from that angle, and he's looking at it, I can only achieve X amount of leads. Those leads weren't good enough for us. So he was looking at it, the problem in a slightly, in that way only. So, the basic answer was that, is that the only way we can generate leads? Quite rightly, no, that's not the only way. So we were looking at multiple streams of leads. You've got Facebook ads, not just Google ads. You could do direct mail, you can do all of these. The end purpose was about fulfilling that criteria. If we led it to our marketing team, they would have said, well, we've done the best that we can, and that's it. But that for us wasn't enough. We wanted to be better than the best, and it may be a best in terms of that, and we've accepted that. But there may be, again, the tweaks that you've got to make, and it's continuously looking at it. So you can't just say, well, I've done what I can, and not look at it continuously. This is where you get feedback. This is where you get other people's views and opinions, and you look at where you can make improvements. And if you have a feedback culture, if you have a culture where, you're talking to customers, you're talking to internal, external customers, you're getting views, you're getting, this is one of the reasons why we get reviews from people, because we want to look at improvements. We want to look at continuously pushing that boundary, pushing that ceiling, and setting that bar higher. And that's the context that I'm sort of defaulting to, because that's the best context that I know.
Okay. Let me give you an example of where I think that you might want to think again. What are you judging your marketing person on? Is it on the number of leads or the number of clicks that they get? Is that the judgment that you want to see improved?
Ultimately, it's about the customers. It is. So it's about the end result. So that's a mean to get to the end results. But if you're looking at, and again, you have a sort of a funnel system. So you think, we need to attract X amount of leads. Then we look at how to convert those leads. Then we look at our eligibility criteria. Then we've got to look at how many of those are eventually going to be customers, and so forth. And there's a sort of a process that you've got to go through. But if you don't get the leads in the first place, then it will has a knock-on effect. So if our marketing team's role was to get the leads, and the leads aren't coming because the person's doing his best, that best isn't good enough for what we need as a business. And it's also because he's looking at it from that perspective. And sometimes you've got to look at, and again, sometimes, this is where consultants or advisors come in and so forth and say, well, there's certain tweaks that you can make here. There's certain changes that you can make here to actually get that small sort of 1% increase or small increase. And that then gives you the dividend, the yield that you're looking for.
Yeah. It's fascinating stuff. So I actually think we are drawing to a close now, unfortunately, but I actually think that you've made the point that I was making very well for me, because the problem with targets is if they're not properly thought through, people find themselves aiming at the wrong thing. Ultimately, the objective of a marketing campaign, I imagine, is to win more work. Now, that's not necessarily the same thing as getting more clicks, because it's the quality of the clicks that matter, not the volume. And if you set a crude target of, we want 1,000 clicks a week, you might get 1,000 clicks a week. But, the mechanic to get that might not be delivering the right sort of clicks. So I just think, and I'm not suggesting that you're getting it wrong, but I'm just suggesting that numerical targets is a very crude and very old-fashioned way of doing things. And that the best performing businesses where people are truly motivated, truly supportive, truly engaged, doesn't need to have targets, because people will genuinely and sincerely, without cheating themselves or anybody else, do their best. If you do your best, then hopefully with the right guidance and the right tools, then the results will come. That's the point I'm making.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm not here to, completely convince from you in terms of your perspective, but I think we're looking at it from a slightly different view. And, we want to be better than the best. I think we want to look at improving that and have an element of disruptive thinking and squeezing more and more out and looking at high performance and creating an environment of high performance and pushing boundaries, pushing the ceiling and getting that, squeezing and getting that little bit of ounce more. And I think everybody can do more, and we can change our thinking by creating an environment where it's continuously looking for improvements, continuously looking for that performance, creating a high performance culture, expecting more, and asking the question, can we do more? And is more to come? I think it's just changing that question around a little bit to say, what can be done better? That's the question that I try and focus on. What can be done better? What can we do more? How do we improve? And really is that mindset of improvement. And hopefully we'll carry on thinking that way and have a journey where each and every single podcast in our example will improve and will do more.
And it is with a mindset of improvement, continuous improvement, and getting better that we bring to an end this Canny Conversation with a cause. And we hope that our listeners will join us next time.
Thanks for listening to this Canny Conversation with a cause. These conversations are based upon the Canny Bites books by Safaraz Ali, available on Amazon. To find out more, go online and visit Saf's website, pathwaygroup.co.uk, or join him on social media. He can be contacted at safraz@pathwaygroup.co.uk.